The storm is being weathered. I am, of course, talking about our beloved Detroit Tigers, who had a mixed bag of a week. I can't call it an awful week. They did go 3-3, but I think that this particular episode is a very fitting continuation from the last episode, which I believe was titled Issues Are Starting to Emerge. And I think that is going to continue in the Tigers organization, at least until we get to the trade deadline. And there are several things, both positive and negative, that I do want to discuss. I want to come into these shows a little bit quicker, so let's get it out of the way fast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, watch hours up. Audio form, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastellaniContent.com, being updated every single day with episodes. Chris Company, Tiger videos, I'll say this, everything that you could possibly want can be found on CastellaniContent.com. Okay, I think we got it out of there in record time. Now let's talk about the Tigers. Like I said, a 3-3 week. And for this particular episode, I want to try to have a duality of man, so to speak. I want to focus on some negatives, and there are things to talk about. But on the back end, I want to discuss individual players, because I think that as we get closer to the halfway point of the season, and I think after this week, we'll technically be beyond the halfway point. Obviously, the All-Star break isn't until a few more weeks, but you get what I'm saying. I want to kind of talk about and maybe even grade the heart of this lineup, the meat of this lineup, so to speak, which I think most of us consider to be Riley Greene, Spencer Torkelson, and Carpenter. Three players who I feel like are in wildly different places in their seasons and wildly different places in their careers, despite being three pieces that we expected to be a huge part of this core and are a huge part of this core. But let's start by talking about the overall performance of the team. Look, they go 3-3 this week. They win 2 out of 3 against Pittsburgh, nearly had an incredible comeback victory, and they did rally and come back against Pittsburgh. Did a great job of making Paul Skeens work. Gave up 2 runs, but he walked 5, which I know he wasn't happy with. Tigers, when this offense is really locked in and they're facing a great pitcher like that, we've seen them do this against Reagans. We've seen them do this against some really good pitchers this year. They do a great job of just grinding out at bats and making guys work. And even if a guy puts together a quality start, it's not their best outing. And that's exactly what happened against Skeens. Now, offensively, they came alive in the first 2 games of that series. Wenzel Perez swinging a hot bat. That's somebody that I'm not going to highlight on this episode, but I would argue, considering where kind of Kerry Carpenter is at this point, and considering the fact that you have Parker Meadows, who's still kind of starting to find it again. He's still going through it, though I think he had much better swings against Tampa Bay. He's kind of saving the offense at this point. Now, obviously, you have Glaber and Riley, who have been doing their thing. But I think the more intriguing and sexier series to talk about was the series they played against the Tampa Bay Rays over the weekend, because they ended up having a 3-game losing streak during this week, with 2 of those losses being really ugly losses to Tampa Bay, and the other one being a extra inning implosion thanks to Brant Herter in the rain delayed 10th inning of the final game against the Pirates. Look, I've said, and it's just interesting how this works, and I'm not mad at anybody. This is just the basic kind of structure of fandom, so to speak. But I've said all year, since they were 18-10, since they were really rolling, I said, look, this team's going to hit a wall at some point. Because the way that I view this roster, and I've said this multiple times, is I think it's a good team. I think it's a team that's going to win their division. I do not have the faith that other people do that they're going to maintain this 100-win pace, and we've kind of seen that come true over the last few weeks. I don't think it's necessarily a knock on the ball club. I think it's just, as I said in my post-game video a few days ago, water finding its level. And I think often people take that as this huge negative connotation, like, oh God, we're going back to square one. We're going back to 500. No, it just means you might be a 90-win team instead of a 100-win team. And I do want to talk about expectations in just a second here, but I think where people are getting concerned, understandably so, and what we saw against Tampa and even in the back end of the series against Pittsburgh, and even going back to the Cincinnati series where they lost 2 out of 3, has been something that we haven't seen much of over the last 2 years, which is inconsistent pitching, both in terms of your starters and your relievers. Now, to a certain extent, I am willing to forgive some of that. I mean, look at the guys that they're kind of throwing out there right now. I mean, Carlos Hernandez, who you just got, ultimately, and I mentioned this a week ago, this has kind of been worst case scenario for this pen, where you've had a weaker version of Holton. Brisky's been sent down. You DFA'd Brebbia. Maeda was nothing. I mean, bullpens are always fragile, and that's kind of the place that the Tigers find themselves in right now. But beyond that, you have guys that you have consistently relied on, like the aforementioned Tyler Holton. But even beyond that, somebody like Jack Flaherty, who's been more often than not at worst good and at best fantastic for you over the last year and a half when he's pitched for you, who is really going through it. Had one of the worst outings of his career, straight up, at George Steinbrenner Field on Friday, and you are still without Reese Olson for a little bit longer. And this team kind of finds themselves in a place that they were at, or where we thought they'd be at towards the end of last season, which is, hey, Skubal's amazing, and Skubal's going to do his thing once every fifth day, but after that, who can you trust in this rotation? Now, I thought Mize was really good prior to the cramp on Sunday. I think that was a big step forward for him. I like the way that he was pitching, very aggressive, really in the zone. But you're looking at a ball club right now that has probably a 30-game stretch coming up before they make moves at the deadline. Now, I don't know why you can't make moves now, but this is just how teams operate, where you're going to kind of have to MacGyver this bullpen and this staff together. As far as Jack Flaherty is concerned, what Jack Flaherty has looked like over the last few outings and off and on at points this season, because his ERA is pretty darn high. It's like 4.6, 4.8, something right now, is what he was towards the back end of his time in St. Louis, and especially in that stint in Baltimore, which is a guy who doesn't have awful stuff, but he needs to be a finesse guy. He needs to locate his pitches because he's not overwhelming. He doesn't have some 97, 98 mile per hour cheddar that he used to feature when he was, coming up through the system in St. Louis. This is a guy who's mastered dominating the bottom part of the strike zone, getting swing and miss with his breaking stuff, and you can't get to 3 strikes unless you get to 2. And he was falling behind in counts, getting behind early, 3-1 counts, 3-0 counts, and then when it got to a situation where they were predictable fastball counts, guys were just ripping the ball. And he's ran into trouble at that point. With that at points this year, it's a bit surprising because he went through that stretch in May where he did struggle, came out of it with 5 really good starts, ultimately having that 6-inning scoreless start against the Cubs to win that series, that Sunday day game. And you felt like, okay, Jack's back in the mix. His last 2 outings have been disastrous, right? I don't care how good you are or how good you've been. You give up 14 runs over 2 outings, people are going to start taking notice. And I think that Jack is sort of indicative of a bigger problem that you have right now, which is there's just not a whole lot of guys with dynamite stuff that you can rely on. And I want to go back to something I said, I believe, in the Friday post-game video, but it's worth repeating because when a pitcher struggles here, or pitchers struggle, people always, or anyone struggles. You play the blame game and you try to figure out what it is. The older I get, the more you realize that baseball is such a guessing game. There's guys, nobody thought Tyler Holton was going to be what he was over the last 2 years and became a weapon for this team. I think it's fair to say there are 2 great relievers in this pen, in Canley and Vest. Those guys, more often than not, been very consistent, very good. You trust them when they come into a ball game. Right now, especially with the way that Herter's looked his last few outings, there's really nobody else that you look at and say, okay, I trust that guy in high leverage in the 5th inning, 6th inning, 7th inning, what have you. And I think that what Chris Fetter has done a marvelous job of, going back to just the first year he was here, when Al Avila was still running things and, AJ was in the early stages of his managerial career in Detroit, what he's always done a great job of is taking on these projects, taking on these pitchers that a lot of people don't think much of, and getting really productive, good baseball out of them. And it starts with the strike throwing, right? Tyler Holton, and no disrespect to the guy, there's guys that you'll see in the College World Series that have better stuff than Tyler Holton, but he commands the ball and he threw a lot of strikes, and that's what's made him work in his time in which he's been here, and he's kind of taken a step back. It's the same thing with Flaherty. Flaherty was viewed when we signed him as this guy. He doesn't have the heater that he once had. How is he going to be successful? How is he going to get outs? Well, it started by having a higher strike rate than he's ever had, a lower walk rate than he's had in years, and getting count leverage, getting ahead and burying guys with that slider or with that knuckle curveball that's been really effective for him. Kind of lost the plot, as have several of these guys. And I think where it begins is the fact that outside of Vest and Canley with that changeup, there's not a high strikeout reliever anywhere in this pen. There's guys that can get outs. But I'm telling you, and I think that we've seen this come to fruition, the deeper you get into the season and the more good teams you play, especially by the time you get to October, you need strikeout guys. Because you're going to be playing some teams that have these guys that if they put the ball in play, magic things can happen. Look at what happened to some of our really good relievers last year in the Cleveland series, or just in the postseason in general. I mean, Foley had one outing against Houston, never pitched after that. He was pitiful, right? Holton, who was unstoppable for 2 months, 3 months, goes up against this contact team in Cleveland and they're spraying the ball against them. Those issues start to arise and become bigger and bigger as the season goes on. And there's so many question marks now, and this is where I'll kind of transition into what the next step is, because the Tigers, I think, weathered the storm in this week. They found a way to salvage one against Tampa Bay. I do hope, especially with the off day being on Monday, that they can use that ninth inning and those later innings against Tampa as a way of kind of pushing themselves forward, because you're going to have to battle a little bit here, but you do have a homestand coming up against two teams that you are better than. Hopefully you can have a solid trip and be able to kind of continue to grow your lead in the division. But when people ask me about the deadline, there's names that are brought up that I think are like totally unrealistic. Like, I'm sorry, but the Blue Jays aren't trading Bo Bichette. They're, I think, currently, if not in the playoffs, close to the playoffs. They're not going to get rid of him. But I think, and this is where I give Detroit fans a ton of credit for just being smart. We've identified this early. There needs to be more swing and miss in this pen. There needs to be more consistency in this pen. I have confidence that this starting rotation, whether it's Jack or Reese or Casey, any one of these guys that's pitching can figure things out as we go further into the season. I mean, Reese was pitching like an all-star before he got put on the IL. They've been without him way longer than I ever expected them to be, right? And he'll come back at some point. And, of course, you have the best pitcher in the world going once every fifth day. It's the pen where I have some genuine concern, because one thing that this team has done a great job of over the last 2 years, and this has kind of ceased over the last month or so, is the fact that, and Holton was a huge part of this, the middle relief did such a great job in the past of keeping them in games. We see these baseball games all the time where you fall behind 2-0 early or 3-1 early, and you think it's insurmountable. Then all of a sudden it's the 7th or 8th inning, and you say, man, we're a bloop and a blast away from tying this game. Now, even that Flaherty game, when they were getting destroyed and he gave up 4 in the first inning, people forget Riley Greene hits a home run to center field to make it 4-3, and you're thinking, man, if Jack can give him 2 more innings and we can turn it over to the middle relief, we can probably battle our way back in this thing. It's hard to maintain that gritty Tigers comeback mentality when you have so many inconsistent pitchers who aren't allowing you to stay in ball games. It's comparable to, and now I think this team probably plays a better, prettier brand of baseball, but it's comparable to where we were at in the Dombrowski era, where people always talk about the closers in general, okay? And there are exceptions. Joe Nathan. But when you look at Valverde or Fernando Rodney or Joaquin Benoit, when these guys were brought into games in the 9th inning to save games, just to save games, they often, by their standards, got it done. Benoit was great that one year where he took over as the closer in 2013. Where they lost games and where they ended up having these leads that became insurmountable was these middle relievers who just gave you nothing, right? I think that this team's done a really good job of finding that balance over the last few years, but the book's out on them, and you just don't have the swing and miss there with Hannafy. You don't have the swing and miss there with Holton. Herder is somebody that I liked, and I do think he has that put-away pitch with a sweeper, but he's not commanding the ball effectively. So it's a prime example of something you see in every single baseball season, which is it's a bit of a when it rains, it pours. Things are not going particularly well for this pitching staff, but they, instead of allowing this paper cut to become a gaping flesh wound, they bounced back. They got a huge rally in the third game against Tampa Bay. Now you have an off day to kind of reset, and you're still. I can't stress this enough, guys. They're still in such a wonderful place. I mean, I don't want any sort of panic here when you have a 9-game divisional lead at this point in the campaign. And yes, there are issues. I'd even argue there's noticeable issues, but that can't be overlooked. There's a 162-game season, and every one of those matters. You can't erase how this team looked in April and May and in parts of June to get themselves into this position. They've been going through it a little bit, but I also think that there's some positive signs. I think offensively, Colts looked better, started to get a power stroke back. Parker started to get it back. Wenzel's been great. There are legitimate positives to look at, and that kind of brings me to what I want to discuss, which is the heart of the order here, because in the Tampa Bay series, but even going back to the last week or so, you have the meat. I might need to come up with a better nickname, but the meat of this order, which is Kerry Carpenter, Riley Greene, Spencer Torkelson. 3 guys who, at various points, have all given you legitimate production. three guys at various points who have all struggled. I think obviously Riley struggled the least of those three. And given the fact that we're at the halfway point, I want to talk about each one of these guys because I think every Tiger fan in the world would acknowledge their success is vital to the Tigers' success. I'm going to start with Riley because he's the easiest one to talk about right now. And he's the one that I have the most positive things to say about. I have had criticisms of Riley Greene throughout this season and really during his tenure in Detroit just because I've seen the ceiling and there will be these stretches. And we've seen a few of them this year where his strike zone recognition just isn't very good. He's chasing pitches. He's trying to do too much. He's kind of got that big loopy swing and guys, he's just beating pitches into the ground. What we're seeing right now is a version of Riley Greene, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, right? Is a version of Riley Greene that will get legitimate MVP consideration if he keeps this up going further into his career. And keep in mind, he's only 24 years old. Defensively, just owned left field in that series against the Rays. That was incredible. But offensively, I think that his swing decisions have been great. I think that his swing path is in a better place than it's ever been. But beyond that, I think that what's made him very effective, and this is the criticism I'm going to have of Tork here, but it's very similar to quarterbacks in football. Hear me out with this analogy, where let's bring up Patrick Mahomes as an example. And Patrick Mahomes, right, huge arm, mobile quarterback. The guy can throw it like 70 yards probably from his butt and complete a pass, right? But generally speaking, how often are you going to attempt a 70-yard pass? What makes a good quarterback is the in-betweens. It's the, hey, you know what? There's not a 25-yard play here, so I'm just going to dink it down and get a nice 6-yard gain to move the chains, right? It's like that with hitters as well, where we focus on the doubles and we focus on the home runs. But the biggest separation between a good hitter and a great hitter is what they're able to do in those at-bats where maybe they don't get a mistake to hit. And I think Greene, when you look at that batting average, it's starting to creep up again considerably. Now, guy still hits for power, right? The 432 to center field that he hit the other night was just ridiculous, right? He hit 2 home runs against Friday. On Friday, he was 6 for 10 in the series against Tampa Bay. But I think that he's doing a great job of avoiding those slumps in moments where, hey, you know what? He had to work a deep count, just flicked one out to right field for a base hit. And those are the guys that I think are the scariest ones. You bring up Aaron Judge, who's hitting I know it's dropped a little bit, but was hitting 400 at some point throughout the season. Yeah, of course. This is a guy with 60 home run potential, but he's just dangerous to face because he can come up there and have a runner go from first to third just by hitting a single the opposite way. I think Greene's development as a much more pure hitter who we know has legitimately great power has been very encouraging this year. I give him a lot of credit. He's been one of the best outfielders in baseball this year. Also one thing that's worth noting, because I credit guys for this, has been left field for a majority of his time here. Figured he was going to be left field. Had to play some center this year. No complaints about it. Right? Probably hurt his metrics. Right? Legitimately. He's a much better left fielder than he is center field. No complaints. He's having an excellent season. And I think that his maturation process has been noticeable during this campaign. I want to talk about Kerry Carpenter, and then I'll end with Torkelson, because Carpenter has been the biggest mystery box in a lot of ways for the Tigers. And that's not to say that he, as a player, has been a mystery. He's been more often than not consistent. But over the last few years, Kerry Carpenter was this weapon that you unleashed against right-handed pitching. And against right-handed pitching, there was not a Tiger. In fact, there weren't many players in the American League better at hitting the baseball than Kerry Carpenter was. But over the last 2 years, AJ's been hesitant to play him against lefties, and he's had injuries. Now, when he's played, we create this idea of, man, this guy, if you play him every day, and he stays healthy, this guy could be a 35 home run, 100 RBI guy. He could be what we expected Torkelson to be. And does the hamstring have something to do with this? Yes. I think what we've learned about halfway through the season is that Kerry Carpenter is not that. Good hitter. Very good against right-handed pitching, right? There's a lot of things that he does very well. I think his defense has gotten better. But I think that there's been this push, and if you've been on Tigers Twitter over the last few weeks, there's been this weird push of people who've been acting like Kerry Carpenter's awful. No, Kerry Carpenter's responsible for like the clutchest swing that a Tiger's had in like a decade, right? Kerry's productive. They get more out of him than I think anybody ever expected. But I think that the expectations some people may have put on him regarding whether or not he can be this gaudy all-star caliber player who bats third every day, I don't think that he's going to be that guy. And I'm also going to make a prediction here. And this is a scorching hot take, right? But I don't think I'm far off with this. And I'm not even saying I want this to happen. I'm saying it's possible that this happens. Let's look at what this outfield may look like over the next several years. You have Riley. You have Parker. You have Wenzel. When he comes back, you can put Vierling in the outfield, right? Let's assume somebody like Jay Henn never comes back and makes it, right? Like I'll throw him out the window, though I do still like him. You got Max Clark coming up through the system. You got Z-Mac, who can play the outfield a little bit. I'm seeing a surplus here, right? And if there's one of those guys that would be vulnerable in a potential trade situation, it'd be Kerry Carpenter. And I know that there's a lot of people saying, oh my God, you can't do that. You can't trade Kerry. I'm not saying trade Kerry. I'm saying that there's only so many positions in a baseball field. And there's only so many different outfielders. And the fact is, what we're seeing from Kerry this year is a fine hitter, average-ish defender. He's not a star, right? Is his ceiling that of Wenzel's at this point? I mean, Wenzel's been swinging the bat like crazy. It's not as high a ceiling as somebody like Clark. It's not Greene. He doesn't have the defensive prowess or the base swiping abilities that Parker Meadows has. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year or at any time, in the near future, but I think Kerry Carpenter, as much as we like him, his spot here is a little bit more vulnerable than people might think. One more thing to keep in mind is that he was not a Scott Harris guy, right? Now, I know Greene wasn't either and Torkelson wasn't either, but, Kerry was somebody that ascended through the system kind of, rapidly, wasn't thought a whole lot of it, and he's been a great story. It's just something to watch out for. And I don't think it would happen at this deadline, but with the surplus of outfielders that they have on the major league roster and in this system currently, at some point, one of these guys is going to be on the outside looking in. And if I had to guess who it would be, my guess is that it would be Kerry Carpenter. I want to talk about Tork a little bit, who hopefully started to bounce out of his slump with I believe, an RBI single in the ninth inning against Tampa, but has been rough for the better part of 2 weeks, and let's be honest, has been subpar for really 2 months. I mean, he's a 220-something hitter at this point. And Tork, the roller coaster that is Spencer Torkelson's time here is very fascinating to me, because I think what happened is that Torkelson put the expectations at the bottom of the barrel. So now, like, every time he has a good at-bat or hits a home run, it's, oh, he's back, oh, he's arrived. Here's the truth about Spencer Torkelson. I feel like I'm really coming at you with some hot takes here, but it's just, this is my opinion. You're welcome to disagree, and that's fine. Unless something drastic changes, I can't imagine myself viewing Spencer Torkelson as a wildly disappointing major league product. Now, wildly disappointing does not mean bad, okay? I was wildly disappointed by Iron Man 2 when it came out. But you know what? Sam Rockwell's in it, and he's always awesome. I can watch that movie when it's on FX. That doesn't mean it's awful, okay? And you can say it's relative to expectations, and you can say that's unfair. My counterpoint, no, it's not, okay? Because if you're watching this right now and you're a Michigan football fan, let me ask you this question. How will you react if Bryce Underwood ends up being Shea Patterson? Now, Shea Patterson wasn't awful. He was okay. He was fine. Right? Never really won anything, but he was a stable college quarterback. But you can't tell me if Bryce Underwood is just good that it isn't a massive disappointment. That's how I felt with Tork. We had multiple teams in baseball that were tanking to get this guy in 2019, 2020. This was somebody that was lauded as the best college bat in decades to come into the draft. He was projected to be a 280, 290, 35 to 45 home run and 100-plus RBI guy in his sleep year in, year out. And I'm sorry, he is just not that. Does he have tremendous pop? 100%. Absolutely. Can he get hot? Yes, we've seen him do it. But unlike Greene, who I feel like does a tremendous job of putting together these stable at-bats in between these moments where he's not hitting home runs, Glaber's the prime example of this as well. I mean, every Glaber-Torres at-bat has a purpose. You'll see Tork have a week where he hits 3 or 4 home runs and you think, God, the guy's on fire. And that will be predicated by a 20, 30 at-bat stretch in which it's pop-up after pop-up, weak contact after weak contact, and then occasionally he'll hit a line drive to the left fielder, which will lead to people saying, oh, man, oh, yeah, it's bad luck everywhere. And no, there's some bad luck, okay? But the batted ball data with him has typically usually been pretty good. I think that more so it's been his swing choices have often been somewhat disappointing. Now, this isn't me coming on here saying you got to send him down or cut him. It's me saying that I think I'm always going to have this kind of weird relationship's a weird word to use. I think I'm always going to have this weird kind of dynamic with him where, I mean, you're looking at a guy who owned 2 Spencer Torkelson t-shirts before he played a game in Detroit. Like, I thought there were people, now I'm not saying I was on this list. There were people that said, oh man, this is so great. Miguel Cabrera is going to retire and Spencer Torkelson's just going to take off right away. I mean, you got 2 generational first basemen back to back. Now, I didn't abide by that principle. I thought that was a bit lofty, but it does speak to where the expectations were, and he's been fine this season. But for somebody that I thought had a chance to be, Pujols is lofty. I mean, he's got 700 home runs. But Mark Teixeira or Freddie Freeman, instead we got C.J. Cron. C.J. Cron played in the league for a long time, made an all-star team in Colorado, played for the Tigers for a little bit when we were quite bad. But is that what we wanted? Is that what we expected? I don't think so. And I think the separation becomes wider when you see the way that Riley Greene has grown and you see the way that he's performed. And there's things Torkelson has improved on immensely. Defense, 1,000,000 times better. Lifting the ball, 1,000,000 times better. He's not having a bad season. I mean, until a week ago, he's arguably an all-star. Now, would I say he's an all-star? To me, no. I see too many flaws in his game for him to be considered an all-star. But you look at the other candidates, he gets voted in. Good for him. And I hope he gets hot again. This is my final prediction here, and then we'll head out. My prediction is that Spencer Torkelson, at some point, is going to go nuts in October. I don't know why. I just feel like he's going to be one of those players who's going to be frustrating. He'll kind of annoy us. He'll go through these slumps, but then he will have that one. He'll have that David Freese, Randy Arozarena, the run in October where just nobody can get him out, and it will redeem his entire time here. He is a piece. He's not going anywhere. He's this team's first baseman. He is not, nor do I think he will ever be the first baseman we hoped him to be. But considering where the farm system is at and considering the player development that we have in place, that doesn't mean we can't find that guy in the future. Right now, I mean, I think McGonigal probably ends up being that guy, especially at shortstop. That's a premium defensive position. That guy continues to hit the hell out of the ball. That's a conversation for another time. But for the time being, that will do it for today's episode of I'll Say This. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Apple Podcasts, audio, Spotify, audio, CastellaniContent.com. There you'll find everything that Austin and I create. We are back with a Chris and Company this week. Breland Speaks. If you watch the UFL, he was the 2024 Michigan Panthers UFL Defensive Player of the Year, former Ole Miss Rebel second-round draft pick, and Super Bowl champion. Fun interview, nice guy. Austin helped get that set up. So I think that you guys should check that one out. I'm not going to come on here and ever say like, oh, I'm disappointed by it, but that was one I didn't really know what to expect. He gave us a good interview, so I recommend that people to watch that. He's actually had a pretty fascinating journey, man. Got a chance to play with Patrick Mahomes in the early part of his career, won a Super Bowl with the Chiefs. So I asked him about his days in the NFL, his days in the UFL, and of course his days playing in the heyday of SEC football at Ole Miss. So a lot of interesting stuff coming down the pike. Appreciate all your support as we continue to march on with content. Continue to support us, TikTok, all this stuff, man. It means a lot to us. It really does. And shout out, of course, to Austin, who continues to do a remarkable job. All right. I will talk to you all real soon. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.